Hi everybody, I'm Stephen. I'm the founder of Positive Planet. Thanks for joining us today on what's one of our partner series of the Positive Planet podcast. And I'm joined today by Donna O'Kell, who's one of our partners, works closely with us in UK for Good. So thanks for joining us today, Donna.
Thank you. Good to be here.
It's great. Good to see you. Thank you. Do you want to give a quick introduction to yourself, Donna, and what you do at UK for Good?
Yeah, for sure. So Stephen says I'm Donna O'Kell. I am the founder of UK for Good and a B leader, which means I've completed a program with B Lab to help businesses that want to embark on their B-Corp journey. We do two things really and try and keep it simple and impactful. And we help business leaders better understand and improve their impact on people, communities and our planet beyond the P&L. The world's in a right old pickle, and we really do need business leaders to recognise that and to courageously step up.
And a great segue into our subject today. So it's going to be a discussion today rather than a structured slide presentation or anything. But talk to me about this concept of courageous leadership and how that can shape not just sustainability strategies, but business strategies as well, Donna.
I think when you look at the data, the science is clear. Most people are very familiar with the science underpinning the climate emergency and also the social inequity, lack of diversity and inclusion in our businesses, in society. And actually, unless you do have a healthy society and a healthy future, nobody thrives. And the world has changed, is changing at a pace that none of us have witnessed before, particularly from a climate perspective and the accelerated impacts of climate change, but also from a societal perspective. And that can feel overwhelming. But actually, we see whole bunches of businesses who are committed to shaping a better world. And that's what it is. It's courageous leadership is recognizing the wicked, an academic term, the wicked problems facing us, whether it's the huge problems facing us, such as food insecurity, energy insecurity, the big issue of disinformation and misinformation, extreme weather events, and thinking about how can we use our business as a vehicle to address these big changes, to shape a better world. And it's very doable. There are lots of examples of businesses, particularly B Corps out there, that are doing just that, doing well and doing good.
And I think it's fair to say that they are the minority of businesses that are thinking in this way at this point in time. So what's that? How do businesses make that step change? How do they transition from current business as usual into that, as you would call it, maybe courageous business and responsible business as an approach?
That's a really good question. I mean, we've talked about this before, and I feel really strongly that the only way it's really going to change is by changing the conversation in the boardroom or in the meeting room, whoever's responsible for making those choices. And let's remember, Stephen, we all have a choice in business. We can choose to go lowest price, most convenient, faster, or we can consider the impact of our choices, our decisions on the people we employ, our communities, nature and the climate. And I think that's the real turning point. It's in the governance section of the B Corp journey, if you like. How do we make sure, for example, that we've got a diverse perspective of voices in our boardroom? Or actually, do we all look the same? Do we all look the same as we did 5 years ago, 10 years ago, 20 years ago? So are we making decisions that take into consideration the perspectives of younger people, of people with protected characteristics, of disabled people, of people of colour, but people who are different from us? So it starts with governance. It starts with having a really clear purpose. What difference do we want this business to make in the world, to people and communities and planet? And then how are we going to make that happen? And that's about policy, process, and proof. It's easy. It's easy making promises. We've seen lots of governments and lots of big businesses making very shiny promises and making a big song and dance about it, but they're not delivering. So it's down to us really as businesses. And I think, 90% of the B Corp community are SMEs and small businesses. We can all play our part, and it starts with thinking, doesn't it? Okay, how can we make a difference? What do we need to do? And the surprising thing is, and I'll finish here, is that certainly every client that we work with, and I suspect it's the same for you, are already doing some really good things, really good stuff. Perhaps they don't have a policy and perhaps they don't have a robust process. That's an easy fix, actually, if the authenticity and integrity are embedded into the culture of the organization. That's an easy fix.
Yeah, and I think that this is where some of that courage piece comes in. It's a brave leadership decision, especially when I think for most of us we haven't grown up and been educated through business in our careers as being taught on how to run a business on anything other than your management account metrics, if you like. So it's financial metrics of performance in a business, and that's what we're typically sort of judged on as a business leader. So starting to introduce new and very different metrics that aren't just about profitability and the turnover of your business is quite a brave thing to do, especially when you may not understand those things yourself as well. So I think that's for me where some of the courage piece comes in. And are you seeing some of that challenge in the boardroom when you're working with organizations? Is there that sort of fear of this is going to be different, this is something new to us?
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you're absolutely right in recognizing that most business leaders of the baby boomer generation particularly have been brought up with the shareholder primacy model. That's what the Section 172 of the Companies Act says. The model articles is that business leaders, directors must consider the impact of their decisions to optimize shareholder wealth, essentially shareholder primacy. In order to shape a better world, we have to think about stakeholder value. So what impact will the decisions that we make here in the boardroom have on all stakeholders? And that includes nature and the climate and future generations. The decisions we make today in the boardroom with our colleagues impact the future our children and future generations face tomorrow. And it really is that significant. Do I see lots of examples of businesses doing exactly that? 100%. We see particularly B Corps looking at the SDGs, the Sustainable Development Goals. There are 17 goals there. Okay, what really does matter to us? Is it hunger? Is it life in the ocean? Is it healthy communities? Okay, how can we not only use our business to make a difference to those problems that the world is currently experiencing and facing? And who can we work with? We're a good example. How can we work together, both business to academia, business to NGOs and to charities?
It's interesting because that collaboration piece is really important in sustainability, and
Huge.
it does break down barriers of competition. You can work across sectors in a collaborative way. I find that really quite fascinating, how businesses are coming together to do that. Just a question on something you said there around that balancing sort of short-term business goals, long-term sustainability commitments. How do business leaders do that even when they're faced with those sort of typical financial pressures that we know a lot of organizations are facing at the moment?
I think that's hugely important. It's about risk and resilience. I was reviewing in advance of coming on today, or re-reviewing, if that's a verb, the World Economic Forum Global Risk Report, and you look at the top 5 risks over the next 2 years, and the next 10 years, actually. But misinformation and disinformation is in the top 5. Extreme weather events is in the top 5. A whole bunch of biodiversity loss and climate connected risks. Ignore those at our peril. You know, the skill and the expertise and the responsibility and accountability of business leaders is to try and understand what's coming down the track. And sustainability, actually, if you look in the dictionary, just means being able to carry on. So given the macro pressures as well as opportunities are changing so rapidly, how are we, A, understanding, and B, adapting our business to meet the rapidly changing needs of people and our planet? So I think it's thinking long term in a short term world, because the way that social media has accelerated its presence in our lives, you know, it's all now, buy now, it's running out, but we need to stop and pause and think, because otherwise it will hit us like a train. Oh, there's no food on the shelves, a little bit like it did in the pandemic. We know this stuff's coming down the track. We know we've got solutions right here, right now. We don't have to wait until some tech that may or may not ever happen. But it's really addressing these changes that are coming down the track from a risk and resilience perspective to be able to carry on within those changing macro pressures, if you like.
Yeah, and I think that's where the lines for me sort of blur a bit here between good leadership and courageous leadership. And actually, the good business leadership is about thinking about the future of your organization, the direction of travel, adapting to changing market forces and needs and requirements. And in the same way, if we're looking at, I was thinking about this morning, comparing it with sort of technology revolution that's taken place over the last, was it 40 years? I've lost track. And all the things that have happened in that timeline, and running a business through that change requires significant adaptation. We're still seeing some of that now with the advent of things like AI. How does your business adapt and change to that? And it's just another factor of change in the landscape, isn't it? If there's something happening, and that creates challenge on one hand, but opportunity on the other. And I see the good businesses trying to find a way to leverage that opportunity with sustainable solutions to identify opportunities in the market for new products, new services, reach out to new clients, etc., and using that. And that's just part of that good business leadership for me. And that's where I think I totally embrace that it's courageous decisions as well. But I think it's just something that you need to be doing as a good business leader.
Yeah, 100%. It is just good business. And it's, if you thinking of traditional boardrooms, how well does a boardroom with an average age of, let's say, 50 plus, for example, understand the rapidly changing needs of Gen Z and after them? They're our future leaders. I think it's an organization called Purpose Union that have recently released some research on what Gen Z want, and actually how most leaders really don't understand the way they work, what they want from work. I talked to business leaders, and I was talking to somebody the other day, and they said, oh my God, I've just interviewed someone. It was like they were interviewing me, because younger people really want to know, what are you doing, Stephen, to shape a better world for my future? How do you treat your people? How do you know you're working with the right suppliers?
Yeah.
They know much more. They've been brought up with it. So they're being much more selective generally about who they work for and with. And we need to really rapidly adapt to the changing way of being and thinking. Work means something very different today from when what it meant when I was growing up, for sure.
Yeah, I agree. And I think the statistics are that 75% of the workforce will be the millennial generation within the next 5 years. So you have to adapt to that changing workforce requirement as well. So How is this courageous leadership then shaping sort of lower risk, more resilient businesses and cleaner and greener, fairer communities done? And what are you starting to see?
In the B Corp community, which is my space, for example, you see companies starting with what difference can we make, and then working out how to do that. I'll give you an example of a company, Elvis and Cressy. They make amazing accessories, handbags, notebooks, belts, etc. And they've start by having a really clear purpose. So what difference can we make? They rescue. All of their materials would have gone to landfill. They rescue, they transform it into something beautiful, and they donate 50% of their profits to charities that, for example, they use discarded fire hose from the London Fire Service. So they donate to firefighters' charities. You get organisations like Ella's Kitchen, another B Corp, that, you know, it's a food company. So food insecurity down the line is forecast to be a huge issue, and that will hit, as always, the most underserved and disadvantaged communities. So they have made a formal arrangement with a food charity and working together. Okay, together, how can we really tackle this issue head on? I'm seeing more and more partnerships like that. And it, it all starts with understanding why. If people come to us and ask us to help them navigate the B Corp journey because it's robust, it can be challenging. My first question is, why do you want to become B Corp? And if they say, oh, well, because Brian down the road's got the badge and it seems to be working really well for him, B Corps outperform, their turnover is greater, they attract and retain people better, high levels of innovation, all of the stuff that you'd expect to see. But that's not why you do it. You do it because actually you're keen to explore, how can my business shape a better world for our children and future generations? That's it. And actually, if that intent is authentic, you kind of know you can do some really good work together. And
Yeah.
the B Corp journey, it's a framework, it's a catalyst for those constructive and sometimes constructively challenging conversations. You know, why is our boardroom all white folk, you know, or white men maybe? What can we do about that? Some really forward-thinking B Corps I've seen this, and I think it's brilliantly effective, have an empty seat in the boardroom, and that seat represents nature. So they will go around the table and say, okay, what would nature say about that decision? It does not focus the mind, actually.
Yeah. I think it's Patagonia, haven't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, they've
Patagonia,
made.
faith in nature, yes, quite a lot. And Patagonia, Earth is our only shareholder. I mean,
Yeah,
genius. But
yeah.
yeah, lots of really good stuff happening.
Yeah, I think one of the main benefits of that, the things like the B Corp framework, and particularly with B Corp, it comes back to this early point that we made around business leaders being unsure of how to measure the effectiveness of their business outside of those financial metrics. And I think when you have that framework with something like B Corp, that gives you those other measurements, that structure, the robustness of other measurements to judge the success of your business, that framework of how you kind of input and implement those measures within your organization. I think that's one of the real benefits, that it takes away that element of kind of uncertainty for you and gives you some clarity around what you need to do. How do you see, and is that your experience when you're implementing something like B Corp with business? Is that just then is that moment of clarity for organizations of, right, we get it now?
I love that light bulb moment. We get it. And when that happens with decision makers, whether that's a company of 2 or 2,000, is that, I love the words, hey, but we could do that. It's that recognition that volunteering, for example, the community engagement in the community is part of B Corp. How do you recognize the impact you're having on your local community and improve that? And that might involve employer supported volunteering, for example. Oh yeah, we do a few days here and there. And then the conversation, well, how about formalizing that? How about offering employees 1, 2, 3, whatever it might be, days a year paid volunteering? And maybe we could invite some charities in, and maybe we could identify charities where there's a key alignment. Could do some really good stuff then. But those conversations really make my day. And I think how we measure success is a vital part to this change. There's a quote by Bobby Kennedy, who talked about GDP. I mean, GDP was never intended to be a measure of the health and well-being of a nation. Never. It's growth, and often growth for growth's sake. So how do we measure success? Because we don't measure our own individual success by just the amount in our bank account. It's an element. It helps us pay for bills and food. But in the boardroom, we came up with this term a couple of years ago of transitioning from KPIs. Everybody's familiar with KPIs: profit, market share, employee retention, blah, 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 all really important. But how about if we transition from KPIs to IPIs, impact performance indicators? And that can be everything from the health and well-being of your workforce. So what percentage of our workforce feel happy and satisfied and engaged, to how many days volunteering, to the reduction in carbon footprint, to the reduction in waste. All of these are really, they're not complicated things to do, but it holds decision makers to account. Now, whether that's, as I said, a two-man team saying, we're going to commit to reducing our carbon footprint by 20% this year, or our waste by 40%, or we're going to increase our donations to local charities by XD pounds. Doesn't matter what it is really, but you know, the old adage, what gets measured gets done. But it doesn't just have to be the financial stuff.
Yeah, and I love this impact performance indicator concept. I think it's really valuable. I think it also focuses organizations on shorter near-term wins as well, rather than sometimes it being a much longer thought process. You know, certainly when you start to think about things like sustainability and net zero, the challenge is one often of we're thinking about 2040, 2050 long-term goals and significant deliverables that are likely to extend beyond the current tenure of not just the leadership team, but probably most people within the organization. So it can be difficult to get that buy-in, that motivation around something that feels so far away. So bringing it back to shorter term bite-sized goals and having those performance indicators against those, I think is a really valuable thing to do. And what you've seen as sort of good practice around that, is that minimizing and keeping to a few tight things? Is it having IPIs across different sections, such as net zero and environmental sustainability, and across other elements of ESG? What's some of the best practice you're seeing, Donna?
I hate it when you ask a question, somebody says it depends. And it depends. I think it really does have to be relevant to the business and its context. So I'll give you an example. If your business is growing food, for example, so you may want to consider, and you know, if you go through B-Corp, your environmental section, as it were, the number of questions you'll be asked in that section will be far greater than a law firm with an office, because your environmental impact is much greater and your opportunity to reduce your environmental impact much greater. So you may want to have some big, hairy, audacious goal like getting Soil Association accreditation, or toxin reduction certifications, or reductions in waste. And you might have 4, 6, 8 environmental goals and fewer customer goals, because you're a B2B business, fewer customer goals. And it really does also depend not just on the size, sector and geography of your business, but it also depends where you are on the spectrum. So, for example, it might be you might have a goal to embark on the B Corp journey, and that might start with, okay, let's have a look at our boardroom agenda. And even before that, why do we exist? Have we ever really thought about that question? Why do we exist? What is our purpose? And when you look at the research that's coming out at a pace now, and all climate scientists are, without exception, saying we're in uncharted waters here, because the acceleration, whether it's the AMOC collapse or whether it's greenhouse gas emissions continuing to rise, doesn't matter what it is. They're looking at now 3 degrees post pre-industrial levels of rise. I think all the scientists saying we never thought we'd be here this early. So the science is super clear. And from a societal perspective, this is really simple. People want to work for, buy from, and believe and invest in businesses they can trust. Now, given the meta crisis that we're living in, if your business isn't making a positive difference to the world, can you really look yourself in the mirror and say, we've got a license to operate? I'm not sure anybody can. If you look in the mirror and say to your grandson, somebody's child, nephew, niece, brother, sister, friend, we're only making it a little bit worse this year, and maybe we'll make it a little bit worse next year, but it's not as bad as we were. I think there is that, actually, to have a license to operate, you really do have to meet the rapidly changing needs of people and communities in our planet, and that doesn't have to be complicated. It's understanding, okay, what difference are we going to make? How are we going to do that? What are we going to do? A really clear purpose. And then the governance and policies and processes and proof and culture should fall from that. Should.
Yeah, I agree. I agree. I talk to business leaders quite a lot about sort of their legacy. What will your legacy be in terms of your tenure within the organization and the things you've done? Because I think there is a point where I think as things start to change more in the future, those financial indicators of performance will become less important and less talked about in terms of the history of a business than the impact it had in a positive way. Donna, I'm conscious of time. We're fast reaching a point where we can hand over for some questions. And I know we've got some comments have come through, and please, if anybody's got any questions, there will be time in a minute that you can ask, or if you want to put them in the comments section, and Donna and I'll do our best to answer them for you. I just wanted to touch on trends, Donna, because we've said we're going to cover this off in the agenda in terms of some of the things that are happening in the marketplace, the things that you're seeing. We've done a little bit of research, which I'll touch on in a minute as well. But what are you seeing as being the sort of key trends around that wider sustainability market and how that's affecting business?
I think probably a combination of everything that we've just talked about, that leaders are really leaning into the risk and resilience of the business. And that means looking at longer term trends and, acting like a good ancestor. So not trying to, actually developing longer term thinking in a short term world. B Corp obviously is still, the movement is growing like topsy. So there were about 400 B Corps in the UK when I started doing this. There are now over 2,200, over 9,000 globally. And I think it's 5%, isn't it? That number, that once it gets beyond 5% of anything, 5% of the population doing something like recycling or wearing a seatbelt, suddenly the acceleration comes. And I feel that that is coming, more collaboration, more focus on impact rather than outputs, i.e. profit. And I think it's being driven top down, regulation, legislation, research, and bottom up by consumers, customers, employees, young people. You see it's just that it's really coming through. I love working with young people. I love learning from young people because we have to. You know, they're our next leaders. Our hope hangs on them. Bless them.
Yeah, yeah. And that came through in some of the research we did, which I think it was about 50% nearly of business leaders, just short 49%, said they were seeing sustainability focused consumer trends and demands becoming a significant factor and consideration for them. And we see that in some of the research that we do ourselves and collate around buyer behaviors, which, and it's consistent both across a B2B and B2C environment, where it's about somewhere between 8 and 9 and out of 10 of us are making are purchasing decisions based on sustainability factors of products and services. And you can see that in terms of the speed of growth, not just in the marketplace, but the accelerated growth of some of those sustainably focused products grows significantly faster, nearly 6 times faster than their non-sustainable counterparts. And if you look at organizations like Brewdog, their fastest selling beer was their Lost Lager, which was their most sustainable product. And so I think that, you can start to see those trends in the market. It's the same with Unilever. Their sustainable living brands grow faster than their non-sustainable alternatives. So that's shifting, and I can see that with our clients. We've got a significant number of clients that have introduced sustainable product lines, and they are driving the growth of their business and really accelerating that. So there's a huge opportunity in the market. The other thing that's driving that as well, and certainly on a B2B side, and we're seeing this as a significant driver of organizations making change, is sustainability in the procurement and tender process. And that was a factor for nearly 8 out of 10 of the businesses that we researched, said that this was an increasing factor for them. And we're seeing it come through now in nearly all of those RFI, RFP processes, that there's some sort of scoring, and an increasing scoring in a lot of cases against sustainability metrics within the survey. And the final thing that we saw was an increasing need for climate literacy within the workforce. And again, about 47% of the business owners, leaders that we surveyed said this was a factor in terms of understanding sustainability, climate impact better, so that they knew how to talk about it, knew how to implement it within their organization successfully, and that everybody was on a similar level, talking the same language with the same understanding, really, and you bring everybody along on that journey with you. And are they consistent with things that you're seeing, Donna?
Yeah, very much so. Yeah, the world's in a pickle. We need to do whatever we can. And, you think about plastics, for example, the anti-plastic pollution and movement is, people are just, we never knew. I'd use the phrase a lot. It's, for me, the only question that will matter when the time comes is, you knew, what did you do? And that splits into 2 halves, that question, you knew. So it is taking time beyond that 30 seconds Snapchat or TikTok or whatever okay, this is really, really important stuff. If you went to a medical GP or a consultant and they said, this is really not looking good, I need to give you some information. Now, if you do 1, 2, 3, you could have a long and happy life. If you ignore this, you wouldn't ignore it. So it's take time to understand what's going on out there, and take time to understand the choices that you have, and make better choices, not necessarily more expensive choices. Now, I was interested in the increase in the number of people, the percentage of people, over 80% buying or making the sustainable the better option. And that ties in perfectly with 83% of us say that we feel better. So we feel like we're doing more good if we make those sustainable choices. So as a business, what are you going to do? You should be producing products and services wherever possible that make your customers and employees feel good too. So everybody wins from that. But it absolutely, that's a good piece of research.
Yeah, and Claire's made a good point as well in the chat, albeit a very brief one, but I think understand what you're saying, Claire, which is, yeah, that there's a requirement to future-proof your organisation with the advent of increasing legislation as well, and we are seeing that starting to flow through, and that's typically what we're seeing at the minute in terms of those trends. It's hitting larger organizations. I think we're going to start to see this in the next 12 months or so being a requirement for smaller businesses as well. But we see a real cascade down of that through the supply chain process of, and if I look at the likes of Tesco, Sainsbury's, Jaguar Land Rover, some of the big pharmaceutical companies, they're all pushing this process down now. Circa 70 to 90% of the carbon emissions sit within their supply chain. So they've cottoned on to the fact that we need you as a supplier to do something about your emissions because you're a significant part of our emissions. And therefore we have to be aligned in our net zero deadlines, our goals, and often that they've committed to as well. So that legislation is putting on pressure, even where it's not direct into organizations as well. So it's a factor. Conscious of the time, Donna, we've got 5 minutes. A good question coming through from Jack, which is, where are the areas of greatest need to support business leadership to be courageous, i.e. what do leaders need support to do?
That's a brilliant question. Yeah, that's a really good question, Jack. I think it's starting with where you are. So it's understanding where a business leader is, and they're understanding simple stuff. Where are you? Where do you want to be? How are we going to help you get there? And those gaps may be relatively small. It could be, for example, well, yes, we want to shape a better world for sure. They may have children that they're just starting to think about, or grandchildren. What's the impact of the world going to be on them, and how can I improve that as a business leader? So it depends on their motivation. So they may need inspiring, they may need research, so they may need to know more facts, or they may need to know how to embed what they know needs doing actually into the culture of their organization. So it may be a kind of practical policy, process, and culture support, or it may well be, okay, where are you across all of the business, and helping them understand what those courageous goals might look like and what those impact performance indicators might look like. Often people may not be familiar with the SDGs, for example, or they may not have considered collaborations with other organizations and charities and NGOs and academia. But I think the first thing is understanding, and second, supporting with inspiration, information, and enable them to have that courage through showing them many, many examples of where it is already happening.
Yeah.
I'm not sure if that answered your question, Jack.
I'm sure it has to, and I think I would add to that I see a lot of business leaders just unsure where to start and kind of what to do, really, being a key thing. And I think often they start looking at things like sustainability, looking at their carbon footprint at a point where they're forced to do something, and it's often then reactive. And what that results in is saying we need to do the things that are being asked of us rather than considering how they do this strategically. And that sets you off on the wrong foot. That means it's sometimes difficult then that you do some of the carbon footprint measurement, you might get your reduction plan, but then it's finding the time to implement the actions and doing the things. And time moves really quickly, as we know in business. We've seen this ourselves as an organization. You're 12 months in, you're going through the remeasurement process, and you think we actually haven't done very much or done those things that create the impact that we would like to see. So I think it's starting in a more strategic and considered way, and thinking about what you want to do, what you can do, what needs to change within your organization, and thinking about those things first, and thinking about those benefits as well. It's how we're going to derive positive benefit from this change before you jump into doing something, and those considerations. And also the other bit, I think, is the risk as to what will get in the way of doing this, and that's often not considered enough. Brilliant. Look, Donna, that's been hugely insightful. Conscious we've got about a minute left. I can see that Billy's dropped into the chat that if anybody does need support, either from Donna or ourselves, if you contact us direct through Positive Planet, we can put you in touch with Donna. Details are there on the chat. Billy will also send out a copy of the webinar, so you can go back on any points that you choose. If you want to get in touch, if there's anything specific you want to ask, please feel free. We'll do our best, both Donna and I, to get back in touch. And thanks for joining us, and hope you have a good rest of the day and rest of the week, everyone. Thank you very much, Donna. That was brilliant.
Thanks very much, Stephen. Bye, everybody. Bye.
Thanks. Thank you. Goodbye.